Hey everybody, Mal Mayer from NC Carpet Binding and Equipment, and we have partnered up with WyoTech to be their sewing machine and supply service company. So we're going to provide support to their students post-graduation. And in this case, we're going to go through our model NC 1508NH, and H here is going to demonstrate some key do's and don'ts. One of the biggest added features in the last 6-7 years has been this foot control knob on top. What that does is when you go from say 1 ply or 2 ply to say 6, it's going to raise your foot on the fly, so you don't have to stop and reload equipment and change heights on your feet. These are set up on servo motors, which controls your speed. We can send you smaller pulleys to put on the motor, which will gear it down for you. So if you're a beginner and you say, I want to go as slow as possible, because you're never going to use the high end ever, but you may want more of a low end, we'll get you guys a smaller pulley to slow it down for you. And I'm going to turn it over to H and he's going to get started.
Okay, so we're going to start the oiling of these machines. The nice thing about this NC machine is that all the oiling locations are labeled for us, like other machines as well. So as we look at the top of this machine here, we can see that there are specific locations for these oiling spots. There is also a reservoir on the top of this machine that we will fill with oil as well. So as we go through, we will show all the locations of oiling. It's necessary to only put a couple of drops if you're oiling on a regular basis. If you overload your machine with oil, it will leak out and you will have a mess of oil. Not a big deal because it's easily cleaned. However, 1 to 2 drops is enough. We'll slide back the bobbin plate. We will orientate the bobbin and on this machine is nice because there is no oiling location here. However, we will need to bring the machine back and oil the top area. So here we have an oil location that keeps the bobbin area nice and lubed up. So this will be saturated with oil. This is an oiling reservoir here. This area will saturate the bottom of the bobbin area to keep everything nice and lubed. Here we have 2 separate bobbins. One is a pre-wound bobbin and one is a bobbin that we will wind ourselves. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate on how to wind a bobbin if you do not have the correct color. So here at the front of the machine, we have a built-in bobbin winder. So I'm going to install the empty bobbin onto the bobbin winder. I'm going to take my thread and we are going to go around the tensioner for the bobbin winder. So we insert the thread through the upper hole. We are going to go around the tensioner on the back side and we are going to bring the bobbin the thread for the bobbin through the tensioner, making sure that it's in between the tension plates, and start the winding process. I'm going to take the end of my thread and I'm going to start it through one of these holes on the bobbin itself. I'm going to drop the arm. This arm is a stop for the bobbin once it is wound. When this bobbin winds up and is full, this arm will kick off and then you know that you're ready to install this bobbin. I am ready to start winding. I'm going to turn my machine on. I'm going to lift the foot up in the air and obviously not have any thread in my bobbin area. We're going to start the winding and the machine automatically winds the bobbin. Once the bobbin is full, it will automatically kick the arm up. At this point, we can snip our thread, pull the bobbin off, and we are ready to sew. Okay, so we're gonna show you how to thread a machine. So we have our top thread, and we're gonna start from the top to the bottom. It is important that you follow the manufacturer specification for threading these machines. From one machine to another could be slightly different. So we will start at the top of the thread guide and work our way around to the pre-tensioner. Here we have a pre-tensioner. This will keep tension on the thread before it gets to the main tensioners. We go through the eyelet, up and around the pre-tensioner. We have to follow the main tensioners back and around, going from the bottom of the bottom tensioner to the top side of the upper tensioner, back down through the thread take-up spring, through another thread guide, through the eye of the take-up lever, down through the other guide, following the guides down towards the needle, behind the other thread tensioner, down to the needle. On the needle guide, we have another guide for the thread to follow. On the needle, we have important parts of the needle. We have a thread channel on the left-hand side of the needle, and we have a cutout on the right-hand side of the needle that is called the scarf. We have to make sure that when we thread the needle, we are threading on the proper direction. In this situation, we are going to go from left to right. And at this point, the thread is threaded through the machine. Key important parts of these tensioners. We have to make sure that the thread is in between the tensioning plates of the sewing machine. If they are not, your thread will not be threaded properly and it will create an issue when you try to sew. Previously stated, we have a wind your own style bobbin that we wound, and we have a pre-wound bobbin. We're going to go ahead and use the pre-wound bobbin for this application. First things that we need to do is open the bobbin plate. Here is what we see is the bobbin assembly. And in this situation, we have to have a tab flipped up. We have the hook of the bobbin. We have the thread guide for the bobbin, and it's hard to see, but we have a little spring down here that makes the bobbin and keep tension on it. So here we are going to install a pre-wound bobbin. We have the main portion of the bobbin area, the hook assembly, and the tensioner for the bobbin as well. As we install this bobbin, we want to make sure the orientation of the bobbin is correct. It should be pulling towards us. We're going to install the bobbin. We're going to drop the tab. We are going to have the bobbin thread go down through this channel to sit behind the tensioner. In order to do that, just carefully, gently push the thread through, keep slight tension on the bobbin itself, and a little forward pressure will lock it in place. At this point, we need the bobbin thread to go through the hole of the feed dog where the needle will drop. In order to do that, I am going to hold on to the top thread. I'm going to spin the hand wheel towards me. As the hook assembly comes around, it will grab the thread from the needle and we are able to pull the bobbin thread up through the feed dog hole for our sewing. So there's a couple of do's and don'ts of sewing that we want to talk about. No matter if we're using a great machine like this NC sewing machine or another brand like FAF, most walking feet sewing machines are going to operate very similar. One thing that we can do is we can start with a runoff piece of material, and that way we're not dry running this machine, and I'll demonstrate that now. If we take a scrap piece of material, no matter if it's cloth, leather, or vinyl, we can start a stitch so that we're not dry running our machine. In order to do that, I am going to grab both the bobbin and the top threads, hold them back. I can either use my knee lift or the lifter lever in the back of the machine to lift the foot, as you can see here. I'll take my piece of scrap material, I will set it under the machine. I will drop my foot back down and get ready to run off my piece. Once we go in 2 or 3 stitches, we were able to backstitch on this piece to lock it in so it doesn't slip out of the material. I am going to sew my runoff piece to the edge and get ready to actually sew. Again, a couple of things that you do not want to do is dry run the machine without thread, dry run the machine with the foot in the up position, and just dry run it without anything with thread in it at all. If we dry run the machine, there's a couple of things that can happen. One is we can bind up the threads in the bobbin area. Another thing is when this hook comes around to grab the thread off the needle, it can actually damage the hook and the needle and throw your machine out of timing. So try to avoid this at all costs. Now that we have our runoff piece in place, we can take our material and set up for our stitch. In order to do that, you're going to take your edges, line it up to the front of the machine, the foot of the machine, and get ready to sew. We'll put the material slightly under the front of the machine, hold our pieces with our right hand, line up our edges, and work our way through this stitch. Being that this is a walking foot machine, the machine itself will pull the material through. When we get done with this stitch, we can utilize our runoff piece. I will cut it off this end, bring it back around to the front, and finish my stitch. This does a couple of things. One, it saves you material and threads. Another is you don't have to take the time to hold your threads back every time you start a stitch. I will also demonstrate how we can start and stop a stitch without having a runoff piece. When we remove material from underneath the foot, we have to make sure that the pressure foot is in the air, releasing tension on the tension plates. Again, you can do this with the lifter lever in the back or the knee lift. Pull out enough thread to start your stitch. Trim off your threads close to your work, and we can move on to stitching without a runoff piece. I'll go ahead and use the same piece I already did before. And in this situation, I will line up the edge of my material to the feed dog hole. I will drop the foot back down and get ready to stitch again. I am holding both the bobbin and the top threads back so they do not bind up in the bobbin area. Start your stitch, work your way through, and end your stitch. Again, lifting the foot into the up position, pulling your threads out, and snipping off your threads close to your work. A few things I would like to talk about are some safety and little tips and tricks of the trade. So for one, when we start a seam on a sewing machine, not only do we want to hold the threads back so they do not bind in the sewing machine, but we also want to lock stitch or back stitch our material so they do not unravel when we're done sewing. And in order to do that, we'll start the seam the same way. I will hold both threads back, hold onto the material, and it's come in 2 to 3 stitches roughly. Once I do that, I am going to push down in this situation on the reverse lever and back up on my piece. Again, this will lock the stitch in place and keep it from unraveling. Hand placement is important. So as I sew, I do not want to put my hands flat on the table. I do not want to put my fingers in front of the sewing needle. I do not want to have my hands with knuckles on the bottom holding my material. I want palms down, knuckles up, light fingertip pressure. And as I sew through, this will allow me to guide better than having improper hand placement. Again, if I had my hand in front of the needle, it is very easy to have an accident. So avoid this at all costs. When we finish our stitch, we're going to go to the edge of the material, back stitch the edge of the material, and finish the seam. Another great tip that I would like to show you is how we can pull the thread out from it breaking. If we take a look in the bobbin area, this hook assembly will spin twice as fast for every drop of the needle. And in some situations, if I try to pull my material out before the full rotation of the hook, the thread of the top will catch around this hook assembly and it will not allow you to pull the material out. So what I like to do is when I'm done sewing, I grab my hand wheel, I will spin the hand wheel towards me until that needle goes to the hole of the feed dog, back to the up position, and this will allow me to pull the material out without breaking my thread.
The main reason what I offered was the brand building, business building, growth seminar, and just ideas for students to truly, maybe help launch their careers down the road, relevant revenue streams, how to really brand build and set the foundation for their companies. So working with someone like WyoTech and H, again, when he asked me, it was just a tremendous honor. I came up with an idea to provide you guys with a vendors list of people over the years that I trust and value, and I was able to negotiate some discounts for you guys. I want to give you guys a really nice list of people you could rely on. Everything on that starter package list that we gave you guys will give you things you're going to use right away. You know what, I don't want cordage, I'm never gonna use it. I just want a top stitch foot or 2 cordage feet, whatever. We could change it, we could subtract from it. However you guys wanna work, we'll work with you. But I just wanna be a network of support for you, and that's why H and WyoTech and Cindy Barlow brought me on. They wanted me to be a support network for you guys now, down the road, 10 years from now.